Greetings, this is Reverend Yue McCormick of True Vow Temple. In this presentation I will be talking about the Nyorai Juryo-hon, or Duration of the Life of the Tathagata Chapter, which is recited in the morning and evening devotional practice and other services of Nichiren Buddhism. In this video we will cover the following portion of the Juryo-hon. Shouzen nanshi nyorai kensho shujo gyo o shobo toku haku jusha ize nin setsu ga sho shuke toku wa noku tada san Yaku san bodai, which means, good men, as the Tathagata, seeing sentient beings delighting in lesser dharmas, beings of little virtue but much impurity, I told them, when I was young, I left home and attained Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi 40 and odd years ago. What are the lesser dharmas referred to in this passage? The word dharma can mean phenomena, reality, or teaching. So a lesser dharma is a lesser teaching or a lesser phenomena. So those who delight in lesser dharmas can be taken to refer to the Hinayana, or small vehicle, practitioners, who delight in the lesser teachings that lead only to one's own liberation from suffering. Tiantai Juri, however, in his words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra, argues that those who delight in lesser dharmas would also include those who only seek worldly benefits, or to be reborn in a heavenly realm, which would leave them in the lower 6 realms of transmigration and suffering. Those who delight in lesser dharmas also include those bodhisattvas who believe that Shakyamuni Buddha only attained awakening for the first time under the Bodhi tree some 40 or more years before teaching the Lotus Sutra. This phrase, attainment of awakening for the first time, specifically refers to the historical Buddha's attainment of Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree, and not the attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past by the original Buddha. According to Juri, those bodhisattvas who believe that the Buddha only attained Buddhahood for the first time some 40 years before the teaching of the Lotus Sutra will also assume that Buddhahood is something that only a very small group of beings will ever aspire to, and only a few of those will be able to follow through on it and actually attain Buddhahood after long ages of practice over many lifetimes. For example, the Bodhisattva Sameda, who met Burning Light Buddha and aspired to Buddhahood, and then received an assurance that he would attain it and become Shakyamuni Buddha, is seen as a unique person. Not only that, but he had to practice for innumerable lifetimes to accumulate the merit and wisdom required to attain Buddhahood. Juri sees this model of attaining Buddhahood as distinct and gradual. It is seen as distinct because it only applies to the vanishingly rare few who aspire to Buddhahood, as opposed to the many more who only aspire to become arhats, or privately awakened ones, who can only liberate themselves from the cycle of birth and death in the 6 lower realms. It is a gradual model because it is said to take 3 innumerable kalpas and 100 great kalpas of practicing the 6 perfections to accumulate the merit and wisdom needed to attain Buddhahood. Juri saw this as a gradual teaching with its 52 stages of bodhisattva practice, as taught in sutras such as the Flower Garland, or the Jeweled Necklace of Bodhisattva Practice Sutra. From the perspective of what Chapter 16 is teaching, however, this mode of attaining awakening for the first time after ages of practice by a rare few is a lesser dharma. The next portion is Nenga jitsu jo butchi raiku on Yaku shi tani ho ben kyo ke shujo ryo nyu butsu do san yo ze setsu, which means, in reality, I attained Buddhahood in the remotest past, as I previously stated. I told them this as a skillful means to teach and transform sentient beings, to lead them into the way to Buddhahood. I expound things like this. Contrary to the view that the Buddha attained awakening for the first time under the Bodhi tree 40 years or more before the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, is the statement made by the original Shakyamuni Buddha here in Chapter 16, Jitsu jo butchi raiku on. In reality, I attained Buddhahood in the remotest past. From this statement is derived the following phrase, Kuon Jitsujo, the attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past. Juryo and Nichiren held the attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past to be the most important doctrine taught in the Lotus Sutra. It is the key doctrine of the original gate, the second half of the Lotus Sutra, whose core is found here in Chapter 16. As discussed in the third video in this series on Chapter 16, Juryo called this revelation by the original Buddha of the real length of his lifespan the opening of the near to reveal the distant. The near is the belief that the historical Shakyamuni Buddha attained awakening for the first time little more than 40 years prior to the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. The far, or vastly greater perspective that is being opened up is that as the original Shakyamuni Buddha, he attained Buddhahood in the remotest past. According to Juryo, bodhisattvas who accept the teaching of the far, the attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past, can enter the perfect and sudden practice, whereas those who cling to the near are following a practice that is distinct and gradual. The bodhisattvas of the perfect and sudden teaching and practice accept the teaching of Chapter 16 of the Lotus Sutra, that the Buddha's Buddhahood predated Sameda's meeting with Burning Light Buddha. The attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past means that all along, the bodhisattva who has now become the historical Shakyamuni Buddha was the original Shakyamuni Buddha. He was a Buddha showing how to become a Buddha. His Buddhahood is not something that comes and goes or must be built up, but an ongoing, constant, universal field of liberating activity and skillful means for all beings. Bodhisattvas following the perfect and sudden teaching and practice are also not trying to build up the merit and wisdom of Buddhahood. They are realizing Buddhahood as an aspect of their lives that is always complete and immediately available and needs to be actualized in practice. The immediacy of realizing Buddhahood by having faith in and practicing the Lotus Sutra is what Nichiren taught as well. In a letter to the mother of his supporter, Lord Ueno, he wrote, "Only the lotus flower bears fruit and a flower at the same time. It is said that the merits of all the Buddha Sutras, except the Lotus Sutra, is found in the promise that all people can become Buddhas after they have done good deeds, which means the attainment of Buddhahood is not certain. In the case of the Lotus Sutra, however, when one touches it, one's hands immediately become Buddhas, and when one chants it, one's mouth instantly becomes a Buddha." This sudden enlightenment to the Buddhahood that is integral to one's life, however, does not mean that one ceases to practice or to act as a bodhisattva. Just as the original Shakyamuni Buddha attained Buddhahood in the remotest past, but subsequently demonstrated bodhisattva practice and the attaining of Buddhahood as the historical Shakyamuni Buddha, we too are to continue our practice to demonstrate Buddhahood even after attaining an understanding through faith that Buddhahood is already our true nature. Suddenly being enlightened by the wonderful Dharma is followed by a continuous cultivation of practice in one's daily life. In another letter attributed to Nichiren Shonin, to the mother of Lord Ueno, he wrote, "One who, on hearing the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, makes even greater efforts in faith is a true seeker of the way." Tiantai states, "From the indigo and even deeper blue." This passage means that, if one dyes something repeatedly in indigo, it becomes even bluer than the indigo leaves. The Lotus Sutra is like the indigo, and the strength of one's practice is like the deepening blue. The next portion is Shozen nan shi nyorai shoen kyoden kai do dashu jo waku sekko shin waku setta shin waku ji ko shin waku ji ta shin waku ji ko ji waku ji ta ji sho gon zetsu kai jipu ko, which means, "Good men, the sutras spoken by the Tathagata were for the purpose of liberating sentient beings. Sometimes I speak about myself, sometimes I speak about others. Sometimes I show myself, sometimes I show others. Sometimes I show my own deeds, sometimes I show the deeds of others. Everything I teach is true and not false." Juryo understood this passage to mean that when the Buddha says that he is talking about himself, he is talking about the Dharma body and teaching according to his own mind, whereas talking about others is to talk about accommodated bodies and the teaching according to the minds of others. The Lotus Sutra itself does not use the doctrine of the three bodies, but Juryo used this later development of Mahayana thought to explain what the Buddha in Chapter 16 was talking about, So let's now briefly review the doctrine of the Trikaya, or three bodies of a Buddha. First, there is the Dharmakaya, or Dharma body, which Juryo identifies as the principle of suchness. The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana explains that this body has no beginning or end. It has all the qualities of Buddhahood. It is pure, blissful, eternal, and the true self. And when hidden within the lives of sentient beings, it is called the Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature. A little further on in chapter 16, when the Buddha says, "It is not real and not false, not thus and not otherwise," Juryo takes this as referring to the Dharma body. This is what the Buddha awakens to as the true nature of life. Then there is the Sambhogakaya, or reward body, which Juryo identifies with the knowledge of suchness, which is the wisdom of Buddhahood. According to the Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana, only bodhisattvas can perceive the unlimited and wondrous qualities of this embodied wisdom of Buddhahood, and even then only to the extent to which they have purified their own minds. These are the idealized Buddhas of the Pure Lands. In the verses of chapter 16, when the Buddha says, "The power of my knowledge is like this, the light of my wisdom is infinite, the duration of my life is infinite kalpas attained through long ages of cultivation," Juryo takes this as referring to the reward body. Finally, there is the Nirmanakaya, or accommodative body, which Juryo identifies with the Buddha's ability to accommodate or share the conditions of sentient beings, so that the Dharma can be expounded to them. According to the Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana, this is the body of the Buddha perceived by ordinary people, voice-hearers, and privately awakened ones. It is the body that is born and dies. When the Buddha said previously in this chapter, "I gave myself different names, living for longer or shorter periods," Juryo takes this as referring to the accommodative bodies that the Buddha puts forth to relate to ignorant sentient beings. Nichiren Shu clearly understood that the eternal Shakyamuni Buddha of chapter 16, who attained Buddhahood in the remotest past, should be regarded as the Gohonzon, or focus of devotion of the Tiantai school. In his rooster diagrams of the 5 periods of the lifetime teachings of the Buddha, we find the following, which reads, the focus of devotion of the Tiantai school, Shakyamuni Tathagata, the Buddha who attained true realization in the remotest past, with true cultivation and true realization. Rochana, the flower garland school, and Mahavairocana, the mantra school, are all attendants of this Buddha. Nichiren Shu also clearly understood that while the historical Shakyamuni Buddha could be said to encompass all 3 bodies, these 3 bodies each had a different duration of time. Also from the rooster diagrams we find this. According to this diagram, the 3 bodies of the Buddha who attained awakening for the first time, who is the historical Shakyamuni Buddha as we have been discussing, encompasses the accommodative body, which has a beginning and end, or birth and death, the reward body, which has a beginning, when Buddhahood is attained, but no end, or an indefinite one, as the reward body presides over a pure land, and finally the Dharma body, which has no beginning or end. Nichiren Shu notes that the reward body and Dharma body are the Buddhas revered by the flower garland and mantra schools. This final diagram from the rooster diagrams shows that the eternal Shakyamuni Buddha who attained awakening in the remotest past, the focus of devotion of the Tiantai school, has 3 bodies that are all without beginning or end. This is the eternal Buddha whom Nichiren Shu also regards as the true focus of devotion of the latter age. In the Sandai Hiho Honjoji, the transmission of the 3 great secret dharmas, he wrote, "The focus of devotion established in the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra is Lord Shakyamuni Buddha, who has been closely tied to us in the Saha world by the bond of cause and effect ever since attaining Buddhahood 500 dust particle kalpas ago, and who is equipped with the eternal 3 bodies of the Buddha. The duration of the life of the Tathagata chapter refers to this as the Tathagata's secret powers of supernatural penetration, which were explained by Great Master Tiantai in his words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra." Nichiren Shu then quotes a portion of a passage about the 3 bodies from the words and phrases that we also discussed in video 3 of this series on chapter 16. I'm going to now quote it in full because of how it further explains all 3 bodies. Juryo wrote, "The secret is that one body is 3 bodies, which is called secret. he. The three bodies are one body, which is called confidential, metsu. Also, what was not spoken of in the past is called secret. Only the Buddha knows it himself, so it is called confidential. The power of supernatural penetration, jinzu shi riki, is the function of the three bodies. The spiritual, jin, is the natural and unmoving principle, which is the body of the Dharma nature. The penetrative, zu, is the unobstructed and inconceivable wisdom, which is the reward body. Power, riki, is the ability to do things freely, which is the accommodative body. The Buddha has three bodies in the three times. It is kept secret in all the teachings and not transmitted. Getting back to the passage from chapter 16 we are currently examining, the Buddha says that everything he teaches is true and not false. Juryo explains that even though the Buddha seems to have made contradictory statements about his lifespan, he can say this because he is using the four siddhantas to liberate people by meeting their capacities. What are the four siddhantas? The siddhanta means method or aim, so there are four methods or aims for teaching the Dharma to others. The first is the worldly siddhanta, used to encourage people to follow Buddhism by explaining how it will fulfill their worldly desires for health, wealth, love, and a good or even heavenly afterlife. The second is the individual siddhanta, for teaching individuals according to their capacities. The third is the therapeutic siddhanta, for helping people to free themselves from their delusions. The fourth is the supreme meaning siddhanta, for teaching the supreme meaning of the Buddha directly. The first three are in accord with the mundane truth, while the fourth is the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth in this case is the truth of the far, the attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past. The mundane truth is about the near attainment of awakening for the first time under the Bodhi tree that must be let go of, or perhaps it is better to say opened up. Insofar as the teaching of the near in the traces and other provisional teachings prepared the way to understand the far, they were true. But now, to not be false, one must let them go and awaken to the far. This is the sudden and perfect teaching. The next portion we will look at is Shoi shaga nyorai nyojit jiken sangai shiso, which means, why is that? The Tathagata knows and sees as it really is the mark of the triple world. The triple world is another way of talking about the six lower realms or six paths of suffering. The triple world consists of the realm of desire, which encompasses the hells up to the first six heavens, which all involve sensual desire and the pains and pleasures that follow from such desires. The form realm consists of 17 heavens, wherein there is form uncontaminated by sensual desire. The form realm heavens correspond to refined states of meditation. Finally, there is the formless realm, consisting of the formless heavens of boundless space, boundless consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. These also correspond to refined states of meditation. These heavens are without sensual desire and formless, but they are still impermanent states and only allow for temporary relief from suffering before one must return to the lower two realms. All of these realms, whether counted as the six lower realms or as the triple world, represent impermanent states of suffering that we find ourselves in on a daily basis. The hells represent states of suffering wherein we see no way out. The realms of hungry ghosts, animals, and fighting demons in the desire realm represent states of unreasonable craving, fear, and pride. The human realm represents a more humane, reasonable, and yet self-interested state of mind. The various heavens represent states of boundless love, clarity of mind, and expansive feelings of peace and transcendence, but without genuine insight, they can only be temporary states of mind. What is the mark of the triple world that the Buddha knows and sees as it really is? The Chinese character pronounced so in Japanese is the first of the 10 suchnesses from the opening of chapter 2. But this character can be translated as appearance, as it is among the 10 suchnesses, or it can be translated as characteristic. Here, it means characteristic, the unique quality or mark that distinguishes a particular thing. What is the unique mark or character of the triple world as a whole, from the hells to the heavens? One might say impermanence. In Mahayana teachings, however, that mark is emptiness. Things are empty of any kind of fixed, independent essence or substance. That is why they are impermanent and ultimately unsatisfying. Emptiness is also their true nature, and it is also their peace and tranquility. From Jury's perspective, the true mark should not be taken to mean a one-sided emptiness. The true mark is the middle way, which is the ultimate emptiness of provisional existence and the wondrously provisional existence of all that is empty. The next portion we will examine is Mu shoji nyaku tai nyaku shutsu yaku mu zai se gyu metsu do sha hi jitsu hi ko hi nyo hi I fu nyo sangai ken no sangai nyo shi shi ji nyorai myo ken mu shaku myo, which means there is no birth and death, no leaving or appearing. Also, there is no one who lives and then reaches extinction. It is not real and not false, not thus and not otherwise. I do not see the triple world as those in the triple world do. These things the Tathagata sees clearly and without mistake. The term metsudo, or extinction, used in this passage needs a little comment. The first character on the left, metsu, by itself is used to translate the Sanskrit word nirodha, which means cessation, and can also mean to extinguish. The character on the right, do, can mean to pass over, which is a metaphor for attaining liberation from suffering, to cross over to the other shore. As a compound metsudo, they are taken as meaning nirvana or extinction. When the Buddha says there is no one who lives and then reaches extinction, it seems we should take it to mean that there is no Buddha as a substantial self or a limited being who will pass away into extinction. If, as the Diamond Sutra says, there is no substantial mark of a self, a person, a sentient being, or a lifespan, then how can one speak of it being extinguished? As the Buddha taught to an inquirer who asked what would happen to the Buddha after death, the Tathagata is liberated from reckoning in terms of material form. The Tathagata has likewise abandoned feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, by which one might describe him. The Tathagata is liberated from reckoning in terms of all these five aggregates. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. The term reappears does not apply. The term does not reappear does not apply. The term both reappears and does not reappear does not apply. The term neither reappears nor does not reappear does not apply. The Buddha is not measurable in terms of the five aggregates, which are subject to birth and death, and therefore birth and death, as well as extinction, do not ultimately apply to the Buddha in any substantial sense. To really understand this passage, one should patiently accept the non-arising of dharmas. You may be familiar with patience as one of the 6 perfections of a bodhisattva, and think that patience means being patient with the hostility or derision of other people, or patiently enduring various kinds of suffering. It does mean that, but most profoundly, the perfection of patience is to patiently accept the truth that all things are empty of substance, and therefore do not arise, and therefore do not cease. This is true of all phenomena, according to the Mahayana. So it is not that the 5 aggregates arise and cease, but the Dharma body or other bodies of the Buddha do not. Rather, no dharma or phenomena, whether mundane or pertaining to the Buddha or nirvana, substantially arise and cease. That is why it says in the verses of Chapter 2, all dharmas in the beginning always have the mark of quiescent cessation. This means they are at peace because their true mark is emptiness. They do not arise or cease in any substantial sense. More positively, it says further on in Chapter 2, all Buddhas, the most honored of bipeds, know that, since dharmas are ever without self-nature, the seeds of Buddhahood come from dependent origination. Therefore, they expound the one vehicle. These dharmas abide in their dharma positions, so their worldly marks ever abide. Dharmas or phenomena abide because they do not substantially arise and do not substantially cease. They are the workings of dependent origination. This is the middle way between self-existence and non-existence, between a naive grasping at the existence of things and a one-sided understanding of emptiness. This is what advanced bodhisattvas who are able to patiently accept the non-arising of dharmas realize. As it says in the preface to Jury's Great Calming and Contemplation, the perfect and sudden from the beginning takes the true mark as its object. No matter what the object might be, it is indivisible from the middle. There is nothing that is not the truth. When one is fixed upon the Dharma realm and unifies one's mindfulness with the Dharma realm, then there is not a color or scent that is not the middle way. Senju Morano translated this part as, "It is not real or unreal, in that it is not as it seems or as it does not seem." I believe this may be the most profound passage in the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha is saying that our perception of how things are is not quite right, but at the same time there is no other reality than this one, so it is this one that we must come to truly understand. Here is Juri's interpretation of the lines "not thus and not otherwise," from the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra. It is not in mundane distinctions, nor in supramundane suchness. Therefore the Buddha says, it is not thus and not otherwise. These four characters clarify the middle way. The next portion is Isho shujo u shuju sho shuju yoku shuju yo shuju okuso funbekyo, which means the sentient beings are various in their natures, various in their desires, various in their deeds, and various in their ideas, thoughts, and discrimination. And then Yoku ryo sho zenga ni nyaka ni nen hi yu gonji shuju se po sho sa butsuji mizo zanpai, which means, wanting sentient beings to produce wholesome roots, I use various stories of past causes and conditions, speak in parables, and in various ways expound the Dharma. Doing the work of a Buddha is something I have never even momentarily abandoned. Wholesome roots are the qualities of non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion in our lives that should be sown and cultivated through our actions. Also, wholesome roots can come about through sowing the seeds of Buddhahood, such as the Odaimoku. This passage also refers to what is known as the 3 cycles of expounding the Dharma. In the trace gate of the Lotus Sutra, beginning with Chapter 2, Skillful Means, the Hobenpon that we recite, the Buddha teaches that all his other teachings are part of the one vehicle. Those who embark upon the one vehicle are thereby able to attain Buddhahood. The teachings about the one vehicle in the trace gate were given in what has been called the 3 cycles of expounding the Dharma. These refer to 3 ways used by Shakyamuni Buddha in the Lotus Sutra to expound the one vehicle to the 3 groups of voice hearers. The first was to directly expound the Dharma to the disciples of superior capacity. This means practitioners of sharp intelligence who have all but overcome with defilements and have high aspirations. This occurs in the rest of Chapter 2, wherein Shakyamuni Buddha tells Shariputra that there is only one vehicle. Shariputra then receives the assurance that he will attain Buddhahood in Chapter 3, a parable. The second was to expound parables for the disciples of average capacity. This means practitioners of average intelligence, average ability to overcome defilements, and average aspirations. This occurs in Chapter 3, a parable, wherein Shakyamuni Buddha relates the parable of the 3 carts and the burning house to those disciples who did not yet fully understand, as Shariputra had, that all his disciples would be able to attain Buddhahood by means of the one vehicle. In subsequent chapters, more parables about the one vehicle are given by both the Buddha and his disciples. In Chapter 6, Assurance of Future Buddhahood, Subhuti, Mahakatyayana, Mahakashyapa, and Mahamadhyayana are then given assurances that they will attain Buddhahood. The third was to expound on the past life causes and conditions for the disciples of dull capacity. This occurs in Chapter 7, the parable of a magic city, wherein the Buddha tells the story of how he had begun teaching the Lotus Sutra in a distant age when he was one of 16 princes who were the sons of a past Buddha named Great Universal Wisdom Excellence Buddha. Those who heard him at that time have again become his disciples now that he has attained Buddhahood, and are finally ready to receive their own assurances of Buddhahood. In subsequent chapters, Purna, Aniruddha, Ananda, Rahula, Mahaprajapati, Yashodhara, and many others receive the assurance that they will attain Buddhahood. The Buddha even predicts that his treacherous cousin Devadatta will someday attain Buddhahood. So here in this passage, we have reference to the direct expounding of the Dharma, to the use of parables, and to stories about past life causes and conditions, which are all methods used in the trace gate to teach the one vehicle, and they are used to teach the Lotus Sutra generally. The last portion we will look at is Nyoze ga jo butchi rai jindai ku anju myo muryo aso gi ko jo ju fu metsu, which means, thus, since I attained Buddhahood in the very remotest past, the duration of my lifespan is immeasurable as Samkhya Kalpas. I am constantly abiding and never ceasing. The characters Joju mean constantly abiding. However, the character Jo can also be translated as always or as eternal. So the Buddha is saying that he is always or eternally abiding and never ceasing. As a historical figure, the Buddha is no longer present to take refuge in. However, we can take refuge in the Buddha who is constantly or eternally abiding and never ceasing. This is the eternal Shakyamuni Buddha, whose 3 bodies are verses for opening the sutra say, expounding is the Buddha's reward body, expounded is the Buddha's dharma body. The letters composing this sutra are the Buddha's accommodative body. This can also be taken to mean, expounding is the eternal Buddha's wisdom, expounded is the eternal Buddha's truth. The letters composing this sutra are the eternal Buddha's manifestation. I now bring this 5th of an 8-part presentation on the duration of the life of the Tathagata chapter of the Lotus Sutra to a close. I look forward to your questions and comments. May the merits of this talk on the Dharma extend universally to all, so that we and all living beings together accomplish the Buddha way.